On today's program, I interview the great, the legendary host of Quirks and Quarks, Bob McDonald. It's an honor to speak with them. We have a real fun conversation. Easygoing guy, very intelligent. He's a Renaissance man, an autodidact, something along these lines. It was interesting to learn he's not in fact a scientist, but he's been awarded 9 honorary degrees. So it's Dr. Bob McDonald to you. He's the author of the books Measuring the Earth with a Stick, Science as I've Seen It, and Canadian Spacewalkers. In November 2011, Bob was made an Officer of the Order of Canada. Bob's been around for a long time, guys. He was the host of the children's science program Wonderstruck. There was another one, Heads Up, which ran on the Knowledge Network. He's a Canadian institution. It's an honor to have him on the program. Maybe it's a one and done. I don't know. I'd love to talk to him again. Basically, what you're listening to is two guys sitting down, having a metaphorical beer together, and having a very interesting conversation. You may not agree with everything he says, as science has become somewhat politicized these days. But I want us all to agree here that with everything I've said, what we are listening to is one of the great Canadians. To separate the wheat from the chaff to this degree proves just how special of a person this is. And you may feel that's a large build-up, but Bob easily slips into that role. It's a great show. Thank you so much for listening to it. Please like the program, comment below in the comments section, subscribe to the channel. Enjoy the program. Bob McDonald, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here, Russell.
Bob McDonald, you're a legend in the business. You started Quirks and Quarks in what, 1992?
That was when I joined the show, yes. The show itself has been on the air for more than 40 years, but I've been with it for a little over 25 now, yeah.
I recently talked to a guy. I said, Bob McDonald from Quirks and Quarks is going to be on the show. He said, how does that guy not know everything by now?
Well, I know a little bit about a lot of things. That's the way it works.
What's your level of education, Bob? Like, what was the prerequisites and what got you to being in that host chair?
Well, I was kind of in the right place at the right time, and I followed opportunities that were open to me, and that's been the story of my life since the very beginning. I don't actually have a formal education. I did make it to university, but I only did 2 years, then I dropped out. And I worked construction, and I drove a truck, and I built billboards, and worked at an airport, and did all kinds of stuff like that. And I thought that was going to be my lot in life. But I've always liked science. I've always enjoyed, ever since I was a kid, because I grew up in the space age and watched them land on the moon and do all that. I just wasn't very good at doing it. So an opportunity came along in the 70s, in the early 70s, to work at the Ontario Science Centre in Toronto. And they were looking for people who were enthusiastic, who were good communicators, and I did some theater work when I was in school. And they liked my accommodation, I guess, and they hired me on the spot. I sort of talked my way into that job. And so that was when I got to communicate to the public in a fun way. They encouraged us to do that, to use props and everyday objects to make science fun, educational, and entertaining. And then it was during that time that NASA started sending robots to the planets. And I was following that. I thought it was really great that we're going to see these worlds for the first time. And the media would call up and ask if somebody could come and talk about the thing that landed on Mars or the one that went to Jupiter. So I did that, and they said, wow, you're really good on camera. Do you want to come back and be like a science guy? And I said, sure. And I just started doing that. And I was freelancing on the side, appearing on all the Canadian networks, on CBC, CTV Global. And one thing just led to another. And I started getting more requests to do documentaries and things. And so I decided to become a freelance writer broadcaster, and that's the story of my life. More opportunities came along, both here in Canada and in the States. And here I am, host of Quirks and Quarks.
So you're a fanboy of science, but not a scientist.
No, I'm not a scientist. And that's why it's very profound for me. I've been honored by a number of Canadian universities who've given me honorary doctorates, and it's always a very profound moment for me to see my name on a university diploma, because I never actually got one of those. But no, I'm not a scientist. I just have an ignorant fascination with the subject, and I want to spread that knowledge to the public as best I can.
Let's talk about science denial. That's the big hot topic today. Now, you don't know a lot about my show, but the Russell Scott Show has featured shows that I consider to be entertainment, such as The Earth is Flat. People who, have actually come on my show and talked about the Earth being flat. And this is a form of the denial of science. The denial of climate change is a form of science denial. It's all a globalist conspiracy, right? How do we move forward when we're already slipping?
Well, I'm not sure if everyone is slipping. Some people are because of very well-funded organizations that want to deny the science or ignore it because it gets in their way. But I think that, we've got more than 2,000 years of the scientific method. Science is just a tool that tries to find the truth. And it's one of the last tools that we have that does that. The law used to do that, but the law now has turned into something like who wins. And the truth doesn't always matter in the law. It's who wins. If you have reasonable doubt, somebody can get away with something. But science is a very organized way of going beyond what we can see. I mean, the Earth does look flat. Why not believe it's flat? And there are some models of the flat Earth from the Babylonians that goes back to the Earth being an island, because it looks like an island. You walk in any direction, you come to an ocean. And the ocean has a sharp edge to it that looks like you can fall over it. And because we didn't have the ability to sail over that horizon, that's what our eyes are telling us. The Earth also looks like it's solid and it's not moving. And it took a lot of science to figure out that we live on a ball. And this ball moves in a lot of different ways through space. It rotates every day. It's whipping around the sun. And the sun is dragging us around the Milky Way galaxy. And the Milky Way galaxy is part of an ever-expanding universe. It took a lot of science to figure that out because it's not intuitive. It's not part of our everyday experience. And that's what science does. It says, hey, the world is a lot more complicated than what you see when you look out your window. And it does that by exploring and by going through a very, very organized way where you ask a question, you develop a hypothesis. I think I know what the answer is. You do your experiments. If your experiments prove your hypothesis true, then you throw it out to your peers. You say, hey, what do you think of this? You try it. And if it doesn't stand up, if your experiments are bad or if other people can't reproduce it, then your hypothesis fails. So it's self-correcting. It's always looking for, okay, well, what does work? Why is the sky blue? How do we figure that out? So we've got this wonderful, wonderful system that has been building on itself for all of these years. But now we've got organizations that are saying, well, yeah, I know the science says that, but, my fossil fuel industry is making me a lot of money. So I don't want to hear that we're bad. So they'll put out a sort of a smoke screen, I guess, and try to put doubt in the public mind. And what disappoints me about that is that we're not seeing science education stand forward. So either denialists who are very clever and very good communicators, or people who just believe something, believe that the Earth is only 4,000 years old, or believe that it was created in 7 days, and not believe the science. Science isn't about belief. Science is about evidence gathering. So I hope that the system and common sense will prevail.
That was sacrilegious what you just said there, Bob McDonald. How politically incorrect of you.
No, I don't think so. I don't think what's politically incorrect about it.
You're now disagreeing with all these extremist Christians.
Well, the way I look at it is the belief in faith. Anyone is entitled to faith. And I don't have any trouble with that. And if you want to believe in a creator or a God or whatever, that's fine. But that's not science. Don't tell me it's science. And I think there are two different ways of looking at the universe. Faith is asking the question, why? Why are we here? What's the point of it all? And is there a creator that did it? Well, I don't know. And if you want to believe that, that's fine. Science doesn't ask the question why. Science asks the question how. It's purely mechanical. How did we get here? What is the mechanics of it? What's the physics of it? And we look in our telescopes and we can empirically see that the universe is expanding. And there's many, many lines of evidence that show that. Every frequency that we look at, when we look with light, when we look with infrared, when we look with ultraviolet, when we look with radio waves, when we look with X-rays, it doesn't matter. We all see exactly the same thing. The universe is expanding. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say, well, run time backwards. Everything must have been together at one time. And when you put things together, they become hot, really hot. And so what was that all about? Something started out really hot and went bang. Now, what went bang? We don't know. That's okay. And when science says, I don't know, that's when you start looking. That's when the investigation begins. When a creationist says, God did it, there's no more investigation. You have your answer. Well, I would rather see parallels. I'd like to see the science do its work, faith look at the universe in an aesthetic way, in an awe-inspiring way, in a worshiping way, if you like, but they're not crossing. And you can't say the science is wrong because of what you believe. Science is based on evidence. So let the science do its thing.
But Bill Nye says science is political. And I'm thinking to myself, how can science be political? Is science not like math? 1 + 1 = 2. Something is empirically true. That's it.
Yes, it is.
There are no politics to it. But then you know what? I interviewed Sidney Perkowitz, professor emeritus from Emory University. And he said, Coca-Cola, they pump in millions of dollars into Emory University. And we're very kind to Coca-Cola. We don't produce studies that say things negative of Coca-Cola. Science is not exactly pure.
I agree. Well, science on its own is very pure as a system. And you're right. Universities now are being sponsored by corporations. They have to because our governments aren't supporting them fully enough, and that's sad. But many universities are also saying, look, we're doing the research. It's going to be open. We're not going to do proprietary research for you. We'll do the fundamentals, and then you take it from there, and then you can go proprietary with it. We'll do the molecular biology. We'll do the chemistry or the physics and help you develop something. But we're not going to be part of your proprietary info because science should be open. And a lot of universities are trying to do that here in Canada. I know the University of British Columbia has a big policy on that. The other way where it becomes political is if the science affects society. So we have an issue where science looked at our atmosphere and said, some of the gases that we're putting into the atmosphere, these greenhouse gases, are heating it up. Or stuff that was coming out of spray cans in our air conditioners is destroying a gas called ozone. Then we need to do something about that. We need to have a law that bans those substances so we'll stop hurting the atmosphere. Now with the ozone, that was successful. That was successful. And it happened right here in Canada, the Montreal Protocol. The world got together and said, look, these things, these chlorofluorocarbons that are used in spray cans just as a propellant, just to push the stuff out, your air pressure or whatever, they're harming our atmosphere. Let's get together and ban them. And they did. There was a ban on them. And we've now preserved the ozone layer. So there was a case where the science had to go political, say we got to make a law about that so that these things are illegal. Well, now we've got scientists saying greenhouse gases are hurting the atmosphere. We should do something about them to reduce them. But we have a gigantic industry that says, wait a minute, I'm making a whole lot of money here. We got the automotive industry. We got the drilling industry. We got the pipeline industry. We got the refining industry. We got everybody that's involved. There's such a big elephant in the room. It's not going to change overnight. So it's difficult when the scientist then has to go to the politician and say, how are we going to make this law? The politician has money coming from these big corporations or other pressures. The science is only one voice in a very large issue. So that's when it becomes political.
Has science always been political, or is this a relatively new development?
No, it's always been political. Come on, look at the race to the moon. That was entirely political. It was because the United States and the Soviet Union were trying to one-up each other, and what they were really trying to do is get the military high ground. That goes back to, the Da Vinci inventing weapons. Leonardo da Vinci, in addition to being a great artist and a great inventor, he also developed guns and military machinery. So there the science was trying to help build better ways to kill each other.
He would have been funded essentially for that, and in his spare time he can do his art and make his little funny machines.
That's right. That's right. So
Wow.
our race to the moon was to build bigger and bigger rockets, because when you can put something into orbit, first our guns were close. You think about combat, about how humans fight each other. First it's hand-to-hand combat, and you're right in the face of your opponent. Then you develop a sword or a club. You can take a little step back, and you might not get hit. And then guns, we step way back to the whites of their eyes. And then we developed cannons. Now they're further away. They're getting close to the horizon. Then giant guns came along. They could shoot over the horizon, so you don't even see your enemy anymore. And then we had airplanes and rockets that could go over the horizon, like the Germans did in World War II. They were going from Germany to England. Well, if you can put a weapon into orbit, you can drop it anywhere on the planet, anywhere. So now you've got the ultimate high ground. That's a huge threat. So that's what Sputnik was all about. The first Russian satellite, the Russians proved, or the Soviets proved, they had the capability of reaching orbit. The Americans did not. So then they had to say, okay, we'll build a big one too. In fact, we're going to build one so big we'll hit the moon with it. And then they went to the moon program. But that's really what it was about. It was about building intercontinental ballistic missiles. We got a moon program as a spin-off.
And then they sell it to the public as some altruistic space exploration.
Right. But it was really the development of the rockets that was important.
Okay, so let's project forward then. This, being on Mars and all this stuff, the rover, is that about militarization as well?
No. Although they use military rockets to do that. The military still gets to test their rockets when we send something to Mars or to Pluto. Those are the most powerful rockets we have, and they do come from the military. But those missions, the robots, are really good science. I mean, that's where the best science is happening in space. The human program, it's awfully expensive. We spent $100 billion on the space station. It's a wonderful project, but the amount of science that's come out of that is nothing compared to the robots that we've sent to every planet in our solar system. So I think that is good science, and it should be left alone, because it's a lot cheaper than what we're spending on the other parts of the space program. But now we have a new player. We have a new player, which is the private sector. We have Elon Musk with SpaceX. We have Jeff Bezos with Blue Origins, and they're going to do it commercially. They're going to sell seats and do it in a financially profitable way. All the power to them. And if they want to go to Mars, do it. Let's do it. Why be spending so much money? I'd like to see the space program get out of the hands of the government. Let the government do the really risky stuff, like develop new propulsion systems, new plasma drives or warp drive or something, and let the commercial sector take over the everyday thing of going up to the space station, going to the moon or Mars. I think that's going to happen.
I think the complete corporatization of the planet will happen. I watched Alien for like the umpteenth time the other day again. And that's where I see that going. You have the company, and you go to these different planets and you mine them.
Yep. Well, that's the way we've explored the Earth. I mean, why did Columbus and Magellan and Cook and all those folks set out? It was to find resources in the East. It was to find resources, or in the West, like find new resources and bring them back. And they did. They brought back gold, they brought back tobacco, they brought back lots of stuff. That's what it was. It's about exploiting resources. Now, we don't have a good history of that with native folks along the way, but that's going to happen in space too. So we'll develop outwards.
You've hit on something here, because what you're saying is that the growth of science is due to the expansion of militarization as opposed to for the purposes of science itself.
Well, that's part of it. I mean, that's driven part of science. That's also engineering. We have another aspect of science, besides the applied science where you get a better airplane or a better gun or a better piece of technology. There's also basic science where you just try to understand how the world works. So you get astronomy, astrophysics, genome work, the genome project that took years and years to figure out the human genome. That's fundamental science, trying to understand the largest experiment in the world right now, the Large Hadron Collider. That's fundamental science, trying to find out what the Big Bang was. What did go bang? What are all the fundamental particles and the forces that hold them together? We don't know that. So there's still a whole lot about the universe we don't know, and it takes basic science to do that. And if you look historically, all of the major leaps of thought all of our advances forward have come out of people asking fundamental questions. So we have to have a division of science where you just pay people to think, pay people to ask questions and then go out not knowing what's going to come out of it. Knowledge for the sake of knowledge. And that's another aspect of science that can't be ignored.
I guess what I was wondering is, if we had world peace, would that end that search outward?
I would like to think that if we took the resources that we're spending at the moment on developing creative ways to kill each other, that we would reach out even further. I think then we would have lots of effort on developing faster ways to get around the universe so we could spread ourselves out. I think it'd be the opposite effect.
So then it's fair to say that while militarization is understandable as an application of science, it's not positive.
Well, we got lots of spin-off from the military. The GPS, the internet that you and I are using right now to talk, that's all out of the military. But wouldn't it be nice to just have these things happen without the purpose being, how can I kill somebody else? We've spent so much of our history trying to develop better ways to kill each other. I don't know what it is about humanity that we have that desire to do it. Other animals don't do that. You know, when other animals fight, they stop. They come to a point where they say, okay, you win, and then both walk away. Humans, we don't do that. We kill each other. I don't know why.
Bob, if an extraterrestrial species visited Earth and were to observe us, they would come to the conclusion fairly quickly that Earth is in the business of killing.
Well, you know, my favorite science fiction movie of all time came out the year I was born in 1951, and it was called The Day the Earth Stood Still. And that was exactly the message. An alien from another advanced civilization lands on Earth with a robot that's capable of doing incredible destruction if he wanted to, but he only does it in defense. And the alien's message, you folks are getting dangerous. You have discovered nuclear weapons. We're watching you. And if you don't calm down, we're going to come in and take over. Like, just smarten up. That was the message. And I thought that was astute. And that was 1951. 1951, that movie came out.
Love these blogs that you have on cbc.ca. By the way, let's remind the audience, when is Quirks and Quarks on the radio?
It's on CBC at 12 o'clock across the country. It's always on at noon on Saturdays. And then it's repeated again on Monday nights, I believe, at 11.
So how do we beat climate change? In one of your recent blogs on cbc.ca, you talk about blocking out the sun, which sounds like something that Montgomery Burns did in The Simpsons.
Yeah, it's an idea that's coming out of Harvard University, and they're actually going to do an experiment on it. They want to go up into the stratosphere with a balloon and release some particles into the atmosphere, either sulfur particles or I think they might even look at something like magnesium, I'm not sure. But the idea is to create a haze in the upper atmosphere, because if you go up really, really high and you put stuff out there, it stays up. And that's to create an umbrella for the Earth to cut down on solar radiation so that the Earth won't heat up anymore. And all they're doing is a very small experiment just to see if the concept would actually work and whether these particles would remain up, whether or not there'd be any chemical reactions and whatnot. But even the scientists themselves agree that this is the wrong way to do it, that we should be cutting off the source of our global warming, not try to put an end of pipe, just put a blanket over the whole thing. There have been some other crazy ideas to shade the Earth. There was one, it was a thought experiment on putting up little tiny spaceships, little shields, like a billion of them out in space around the Earth to shield the sun from the sun that way. Now, this is very dangerous because we're playing with our atmosphere. We're already doing an uncontrolled experiment by heating it up right now, and we're getting some surprises from that. Shifts in ocean currents, shifts in weather patterns, monsoons, melting ice and stuff like that. So if we think we can do another experiment on top of that, it's kind of foolhardy. But the scientists that are doing it say this would be a last stopgap measure. If we found the Earth getting so hot that it was unbearable, then maybe we could shield it. But we really need to look at the issue and accept the fact that this is a thing, and let's just move forward. Let's just move forward. And it doesn't mean going back to the caves and the trees. It just means evolving our technology. There are other ways to turn wheels, other ways to move vehicles, other ways to keep ourselves warm without using fossil fuels. Most of those technologies already exist. We just need to do a little more science on them, and we need to do some political backing for them to give them breaks so that they're not so expensive for the consumers. That can be done. That can be done.
I was watching Bill Nye's new program yesterday, and they were saying if the world wanted to, we could switch to 100% renewable energy sources today, and all our energy needs would be met.
There is no shortage of energy on planet Earth. It falls out of the sky every day.
And we don't need nuclear either.
No, although there are other ways of looking at nuclear. We don't have to do it the way we did. Nuclear is not all bad. Nuclear has incredible energy density. And there are small nuclear reactors that just do small communities that you put underground. And they're quite safe. They're totally contained. They don't have to be these big, gigantic things that we've had in the past that are overly expensive. So I don't think we should take nuclear completely out of the picture. And then there's nuclear fusion that's on its way, although they've been working at that for decades. But there's a reactor in France that they're hoping to break even soon. So I think there are a lot of different ways. We can't think of our energy anymore as coming from one thing. We've been spoiled with fossil fuels because it's cheap and you just dig it out of the ground and burn it. I think in the future, energy is going to come from a lot of different sources, including your house. You'll have solar panels on the roof. There'll be windmills. There'll be geothermal. There'll be lots of different ways that you'll be getting your energy rather than just from one source on a grid.
Chemtrails, real or fake? Have you heard?
Fake. You know, every airplane that flies about 30,000 feet makes a trail in the atmosphere. It's called water vapor coming out of an engine because one of the big products of combustion when you burn fossil fuels, when you burn kerosene in a jet engine, is water vapor. It's inside the engine at very high temperatures. It goes out the exhaust pipe and it hits very, very cold air because they're up at high altitude, and it condenses and you get a cloud. You get a trail behind the jet. That's what it is. It's water vapor. Once in a while, I watch programs that are conspiracy theory based, whether they be chemtrails or whether they be UFO abductions or that we didn't land on the moon and all that. And I get really, really angry at these programs. And it bothers me that they get so much airtime because they don't really present evidence. They'll just ask questions. What if? What if? What if this shadow that I see on the moon is a building? Ooh, there's buildings on the moon. And they do this stuff. And it's not good science. It's people with opinions and beliefs again. We're back to this belief thing. And, you know, UFOs. Yeah, if UFOs are here, how come nobody's got a clear picture of one? Everybody in the world now has a camera in their phone. I mean, back in the old days when, you know, you had to get your camera out to get a picture of something in the sky, sure, it would be blurry and rare. But now everybody's got a phone. So how come we're not seeing these things all over? How come we don't have a clear picture of a UFO? Why don't we have one piece of metal from a UFO spaceship that's clearly not from Earth, or one fragment of DNA from an alien that abducted somebody? We don't have anything. It's all belief. It's all belief. It's not science. And I get really, really angry when those shows are on the air and I propose a science program for kids and they say, oh, we can't afford that. I've had that happen to me many times. I've had lots of shows on the air, but a lot of them haven't made it because, oh, we can't afford that. So what's wrong when we can't put out science education programs, but we can put out these ridiculous conspiracy theory programs that only ask questions and never provide answers?
Yeah, they mandated, though, like a lot of those Saturday morning cartoons, they went by the wayside because they mandated that there had to be education shows for Saturday morning television.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and then they never got ratings. Life on new planets. The Star Trek universe, I think it's absurd personally. I wanted to get your take on it.
Well, I love Star Trek and I love science fiction, and we need science fiction. We need imagination. We need people that reach out and try to imagine a future that's either utopian or horrible or whatever. We need, you know, that's art and science coming together. Whenever art science comes together, it's usually very beautiful. So we really need the imagination of science fiction writers and producers. But as far as contacting alien life, one of the things that bothers me about Star Trek is that whenever they land on a planet, it's always a really nice day. They don't wear spacesuits. They don't even wear coats. It's always nice and warm, just like it is in California. And all the aliens speak English. It's not like that. I believe that there's life throughout the universe. I believe that. We haven't found it yet. We're finding planets around almost every star, and there are, I don't know, 300 billion stars in our galaxy. So if each one of them had 3 planets, that's 1 trillion planets just in our galaxy. And our galaxy is one of 100 billion galaxies in the universe, at least. So the numbers are staggering. So there has to be other life out there. But we're just really spread out in space and time. Things are so far apart, we don't have the rockets to travel around and visit them yet. We don't have warp drive. And we can't even communicate because it takes hundreds of years to get there and back at the speed of light, even at the speed of light. However, I think they're there. And when we do contact alien life, it's going to be very, very different from us. And if it's intelligent life, we're going to have culture shock, getting used to both what they look like and how to communicate with them. We're going to have a language problem. The science fiction movie that came out just this year, Arrival, that was really good at trying to communicate with creatures that are very, very different, but intelligent. And they sort of portrayed that, I think, in the best I've seen in a long time. But we're also, I believe, going to find life in worlds. We're finding life inside the Earth. As we go down in mines and caves, there's life hundreds of meters down below, living in crevices and rocks that don't require sunlight. They use chemosynthesis. They use the chemistry of the water interacting with the rocks. There's little bacteria that can eat that stuff, and then creatures that live on the bacteria, whole ecosystems. We have hydrothermal vents at the bottom of our oceans. Again, totally cut off from the sun, with life forms that use the chemistry of the water rather than sunlight as the bottom of the food chain. And now we're finding that in our solar system, we have moons going around the big planets like Jupiter and Saturn that are covered in ice. And we know there are oceans underneath those ice covers. So are there hydrothermal vents there? Is there life there? I think that's where we really have to look. And it's looking more and more like that may be the case. So we got to send more of those robots out there to do some ice fishing. And that's the kind of life we're going to find, at first anyway, unless the aliens come here.
I have Felicity Aston on the show later in the year. She was the first woman to ski across Antarctica alone. And she also does shows for BBC UK. One of the recent presentations she's done is they do these science excursions in airships, dirigibles, and they take vapor samples from the clouds. And they're finding that there are entire life systems within the clouds themselves.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. In fact, when it rains, raindrops have to form around particles in the atmosphere. It's called nucleation for water vapor to turn back into a liquid. It needs something to coalesce around. So a lot of that is dust in the air, but a lot of it's life. So raindrops that are coming down are actually alive. And if you listen very carefully, sometimes you can hear them falling. You know, ah!
Oh, you're morbid, Bob. Those drops would actually then protect the life within it.
Yep.
Oh, nature's unbelievable. God. But what I was going to get at, the absurdity of the Star Trek universe is they're all humanoid.
Yes.
Right? You know, like people don't realize, listen, we look this way because we adapted to Earth. You know, Earth is a negative 9.81 meters per second acceleration, the distance from us to the moon, the size of the moon. All of these things make us look this way.
Yeah, but even we're rare on the planet Earth. We only stand on 2 legs. Most creatures stand on 4, 6, or 8. And, you know, we have these limbs. We're slow. We don't have very strong weapons. We don't have big teeth. You know, it's amazing we're even here compared to some of the other forms of life. And look at the variety of life in the ocean. Look at how many different forms of life you can have there. You can be a piece of jelly and survive. So when we look at life in the rest of the universe, that's the kind of variety we need. And I think it's going to be really interesting when we run across a form of life that is more advanced, older, wiser, and smarter than we are, but it looks like an octopus or a jellyfish or, I don't know, something really weird. We got to deal with that they're not like us. There are other ways of living.
The first thing we'd think of is how to kill it.
Probably. Or eat it.
Or eat it.
Or maybe they'd want to eat us. Who knows?
To serve man.
I've thought about this a lot, about what aliens might be like, you know, and it's not just physically what they look like, but how they think. Suppose they lived at a very different metabolic rate. suppose they were very slow like trees. Trees live a long time and they don't change much and they don't move much. So you ask an alien a question and says, well, let me think about that for a couple of centuries and I'll get back to you. Or what if they were really fast? What if they had a generation time of an hour? They go through a whole generation every hour. They would be evolving. They'd be changing as we look at them. You wouldn't be talking to the same person all the time. You'd always be talking to the next generation. How do you deal with that? Your conversation would become a culture to them. A culture. Gets weird, doesn't it? What if they were really tiny? What if they were really, really small? I was thinking about that one night when I was watching an insect on a hot summer night, and this bug came right up to my face and just hovered right in front of me. And then did this very geometric pattern, sort of almost a square right in front of my face. It was almost like he was checking me out, which he probably was. So I thought, gee, I wonder if that's an alien spaceship and they're just sort of landed here on Earth. They're small, we don't notice them, and then they buzz away. How would we communicate with them? How do we relate to them? Maybe aliens are really tiny, which would make sense if you want to go across space and you need to cover great distance. Small is better. You can send small things really, really fast with much less energy. So, yeah, maybe mosquitoes are aliens.
But we can at least agree that humans are by far the smartest organism on the planet, if you look at the encephalization quotient alone.
Well, we have big brains. Whales have bigger brains than we do for their body size. But how do you define smart? How do you define smart? We're extinguishing each other. We're killing each other off. We're not being responsible for the planet. Is that smart? We're clever. We're very clever. But dinosaurs were around for 150 million years. We've been around for 6. That's when we stood up on 2 legs, about 6 million years ago. And here we are wondering if we're going to survive ourselves after only 6 million years. The dinosaurs did it for 150. Who's smarter? What do you call smart? That's a very difficult question to ask.
But things are accelerating. Even the eras are accelerating.
Yes, they are. We live in remarkable times. It's astounding to be alive.
You could even argue that the Cenozoic era has ended and we've entered into the Holocene. And this brings up climate change again. Is the Holocene extinction an inevitability at this point?
I like to think that humans are clever.
All of a sudden we are smarter than the dinosaurs, Bob.
Well, I don't know, yeah. Well, the dinosaurs couldn't do anything about that asteroid that hit. We can. We could deter an asteroid. We could change our own evolution. Evolution of the Earth has been changed by giant impacts that have almost sterilized this planet at least 5 times. And what comes back after the impact, after the Holocaust, is different than what was there before. We now have the capability to see one coming and to deflect it and not have that fate hit us. So I think that while there might be some really ugly, I don't want to say exterminations, but die-offs of humanity because of lack of resources, disease, wars. But I don't think we'll completely kill ourselves off. I think the human spirit is enough that we could rally in an emergency and adapt. We're very good in emergencies at dealing with it or dealing with crises. I just hope it doesn't have to get to the crisis stage. I'd like to think that we have foresight, that we can avoid it before it happens, but sometimes I get discouraged about that.
At some point, you're going to have to retire. You took over for someone else. You're going to have to pass the torch on. I'm not campaigning. But at some point, it has to end. If you could say you have accomplished one thing, the culmination of your work, let's say, what would that be?
Well, one of the things that really warms my heart, and this just happened recently, I was at an event at Laurentian University in Sudbury. I was speaking there, and there were students from all over Ontario. It was a biology conference. And during that event, I had some students come up to me who are now graduating saying, I used to watch you when I was a kid. I had a kid series called Heads Up that was all about space that ran on the Knowledge Network and TV Ontario in the mid-2000s, around 2004, 2005. They said, you helped me get interested in science, and that's why I'm a scientist today. And at the same event, I had professors come up to me and say, I used to watch you when I was a kid back in the 80s because I had another kid show called Wonderstruck that was on the CBC in the 80s. So I've got two generations of people who are in science now who are telling me they got that way because they watch me, that I inspired them to get interested in science. That's my reward. That just overwhelms me when I hear that. And I've even had people stop me in the street and say, I'm a scientist now because I watched you. So if I can inspire someone to get interested in science, they don't have to become scientists, but at least take an interest in it, so that we'll have an educated society. So that as we face the challenge of climate change or overpopulation or water or food or whatever it is that we need to deal with, that we'll have a smart population that can look at the science, because science will point to some sensible solutions and make the right decisions so that we can get through this crisis and get over to the other side of it. So if I had a small part of that in educating people about science or inspiring them about science, I'll feel I've done my job.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Like, you're not a scientist. You have a fascination in science. You're a conduit to others. How many scientists have you created?
Yeah, I don't know.
Like that, who knows, right? Is it 100? Is it 1,000? And how many do they create? It's just amazing. Good for you, Bob. And thank you so much for your time today.
Can I send out a message to your younger listeners?
If there are any younger listeners listening, you may.
Well, actually, for anybody. One of the best things that I did when I was in my late 20s was I went all the way around the world by myself. And travel is one of the best forms of education that you can get. I learned during my solo trip that people are generally good wherever you go. The best thing that happened to me when I was traveling is getting lost, because I'd have to ask for help. And so often people would say, well, why don't you come in for some tea or some cha, even if they didn't speak English. They heard I was from Canada, especially. But I found that most people in the world are just like you and I. They want to get on with their lives. They want to raise their families, have a job, eat. It's not what you see on the news. And if you see the world through television or through the computers, that's not really what the world is like. The news reports on a very small minority of people who hate each other and who are fighting. I find the news now is really who died today. That's what the news has become. But in fact, the world's actually a very beautiful place and people are wonderful. And I encourage everybody to get off North America. We live in an island of affluence in a world where there's a lot of poverty. And go to other countries and see how people live, see how different people live. And it's not always a horrible thing. People find ways to adapt with very few resources. And they're still funny. They still like to laugh and tell jokes and sing and dance, even though they don't have much. And it's the best education you can get to both see our planet culturally and see it geographically. It's the most beautiful planet there is. Mars is really neat, but it's cold, and there's no oxygen in the atmosphere. It'd kill you if you walked out without a spacesuit. Saturn's got its beautiful rings, fabulous looking planet, giant, so is Jupiter, but they'll kill you. There isn't another one we know of that you can step outside without a spacesuit on. We don't know of another planet like that yet. So go see it. Go look at your planet and appreciate it. Get out into nature and take a little kid with you. Take a little kid and shove their face in the dirt. Show them, turn over a rock and see what's crawling around underneath it. Just appreciate this incredible place that we live. It's America, we're even here. It's astounding. Science has taught us a lot about that, but just get out and look at it for yourself. Go beyond the science.
I got interested in mycology a few years ago. I live right next to Stanley Park, 1 block away here in Vancouver. My son and I would go out on daily excursions looking for mushrooms, and I'm able to identify all the different genuses and species. And all of a sudden you realize that they're everywhere. You just can't help but spot them now because you've been awakened to it. And when you start to open your eyes and really research and learn about the planet that we're living on, it's unbelievable, Bob. Why are we immersing ourselves in video games? We have the greatest game.
Yeah, it's called reality. It's multisensorial, It's 3D. It's all around you. It comes with smell-o-vision and audio, visual. It's all there, tactile. It's all there.
It's going to take scientists like 100 years to get as good as reality is now.
Yeah.
Very cool. One of the last stupid things I want to talk about is Planet X. Have you heard of this one, the Planet X conspiracy, Nibiru?
Yeah.
It's just another one of these fake science things.
Well, actually, no, that's become a reality. They now do believe that there is another planet out beyond the Oort cloud, because some of the objects that exist beyond Pluto, well, actually, Pluto is one of them. They're called Kuiper Belt objects. Our whole solar system is surrounded by snowballs, like Pluto, and smaller. And they found that there's a group of them in one direction of the sky that are all aligned in a particular way that would indicate that there's a gravitational pull from another object beyond them. And so there's a search on right now for that planet, and they think it's about the size of Neptune. But we haven't spotted it yet. In fact, I think there's a citizen science project to try to find it. The problem is it would be so far out, it'd be very dim, hard to see, and it would be moving very slowly across the sky. That's how we find planets. We watch them move. The word planet means wanderer. So when they're that far out, they're very slow. So it'll take a while, but they think it's really there. And I think that's astounding, that there's been a planet that's right in our backyard that we haven't seen. There's so much of the universe we don't know. 90% of it is dark matter and dark energy. We haven't got a clue what either one of those are, but we know they're out there. So we think we're smart. We still don't know what 95% of the universe is. We still have a long way to go.
So tell me about Quirks and Quarks. What do you have happening on the show this weekend? Where's the show going? Are you going to retire anytime soon, Bob? Tell me about Quirks and Quarks.
Well, Quirks and Quarks is a team effort. I'm one of a team of, well, right now it's 5 of us. And the producers do all the heavy lifting. They make me sound a lot smarter than I really am. So we put each show together each week. So I can't tell you what's on this week's show because I don't know yet. I won't know until tonight and tomorrow morning. I'm only on the show 3 days a week from Wednesday to Friday. The producers spend Monday and Tuesday going through all of the embargoed releases from journals, from universities. They're very dialed in to what's out there, what's being published this week. They call up the lead scientists on all these papers, phone them and find out how they can talk. A lot of scientists don't make it on our program because they're not good communicators. That's a big thing about science. You have to be able to communicate it as well. And then they arrange for the scientists to go to a radio studio, either in their town or right there on the university campus. Most campuses now have their own radio stations, and we can connect to those. And then they send me all the background material that I have to read. We come up with a suggested line of questions that we work together on. And then on Wednesday and Thursday, I do the interviews. And my interviews usually go longer than what you hear on the air, quite a bit longer. Then it's all edited together. Then Friday afternoon, we assemble the entire program. So each show is done each week. Now, occasionally, one of the producers will take on one subject and do a documentary on that. Or we'll do a question show where we take questions from the audience. But otherwise, each show comes together each week. So for me, it's a really steep learning curve sometimes. I have to find out about some of these subjects, especially medicine. I find that really difficult. But my job is really listening. Once I know the story, my job is to understand the story before I go into the interview, and then make sure that the scientist tells me that story. So when I ask a question, if I don't get that answer, I have to draw it out. Or if they give it to me in a really complicated, difficult, jargon-filled way, I'll try to spin it back to them. So when you hear me say, let me see if I got this right, that's me thinking on the spot. And I try to do it back in one sentence and usually with an analogy to try to just sum it up. So I see myself as a translator between the scientists and the public. They speak a different language. So I'm translating that into English that's understandable. That's my job. And it's wonderful. And every week is different. It's amazing. Every week is different. Scientists tell me their stories from all over the world. And I feel so privileged to be able to do this. You know, every year when the Nobel Prizes come out, they're talking to me. I get to talk to who just won the Nobel Prize. How cool. So I'll keep doing this as long as they let me.
Yeah. And I want to defend the CBC, by the way. I worked at the CBC building here in Vancouver for 3 years. They're great people. Every taxpayer in Canada is paying, I think, 2 cents a day into the CBC or something like this. I don't know why more people don't support it.
Well, it's a national treasure. It's an archive of Canadian history at this point, from the time it's been on the air, both television and radio. And it's a huge intellectual capital. The people who work there are very dedicated to journalism, to seeking the truth, and to putting it out in an informative and educational way. And I feel very privileged to be part of it.
Yeah. Well, I've privileged myself, sir. It's been an honor to speak with you. You're like Canada's Bill Nye, but let's be honest, you stand alone, so we don't have to...
I've been around longer than Bill Nye. Bill Nye is the United States Bob McDonald. How about that?
There you go. Bob McDonald, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Quirks and Quarks is on every Saturday at noon on CBC Radio. Bob McDonald, an honor. Thank you so much for being a guest on the program today.
Thank you, Russell. It was a lot of fun.